Hello to everyone attending the National Nonpartisan Conversation on Voting Rights. Thank you, Mayor Hancock of Denver and Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago for hosting this important event. And thank you to everyone who is working to protect, defend, and promote our freedom to vote. Now more than ever, it's clear that we must enact basic federal standards to make sure all Americans can vote in the way that works best for them, regardless of what state or zip code they live in. That's why last month I introduced the Freedom to Vote Act. The legislation is a result of discussions in the Voting Rights Working Group that we put together with Senator Schumer, Senator Manchin, Merkley, Kaine, King, Padilla, Tester, and Warnock. We worked all through the summer and agreed on a very important bill, building off the work that we did on For the People, but taking on this notion that people should be making it harder to vote rather than easier. Over 400 bills have been introduced in almost every state this year to roll back voting rights, and over 30 have been signed into law. The freedom to vote is under attack, as we've seen in states like Georgia, Florida, Iowa, Montana, and last month in Texas. We are up. Those of us who believe in democracy are up against a coordinated effort to limit the freedom to vote. This demands a federal response. And by the way, the Constitution is clear. The Constitution says that Congress has the right to make or alter the laws regarding federal elections. It couldn't be clearer. It's been upheld over and over again. And I believe that provision was in there designed to help us in situations just like this. As chairwoman of the Senate Rules Committee, which has jurisdiction over federal elections and campaign finance law, I work to ensure voting rights are a priority. One of our first hearings this year was on the For the People Act, and I took the Rules Committee on the floor for a field hearing for the first time in 20 years. And we have done events all over the country, making sure that we get the information firsthand about what's happening to roll back voting rights. In Georgia alone, and I was there with Senators Warnock and Ossoff, we found out that not only does that law that got signed into law by their governor, not only does it say no water or food when you're in line from volunteers, it also says that you've got to put your birth date on the outside of the inner envelope. You know what people do? They understandably write the date that they're filing their ballot. It says that you can't vote on weekends in the runoff period. It says you can't register vote during the runoff period. It says that there are limitations when it comes to vote by mail and ballot drop-off boxes. That's what we're dealing with here. There was one bill that passed through the legislature in Wisconsin, luckily vetoed by the governor there, that said there was only one drop-off box in the entire city of Milwaukee. This is, to quote a court years ago when dealing with a North Carolina law, this is discrimination with surgical precision. I've also talked with Democratic and Republican election officials across the country about how we can safeguard our elections. And I've heard from Americans, like the veteran who served in our country only to face an hours-long line to vote early when he saw elderly voters leave because they couldn't stand long in the hot sun. That's why we need this bill. The Freedom to Vote Act builds on the framework put forward by Senator Manchin in June and includes so many of the key reforms in the For the People Act that Senator Merkley and I led. Automatic voter registration in all states through the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's in the Freedom to Vote Act, requiring all states to offer same-day voter registration and 2 weeks of early voting, including weekends. That's in the Freedom to Vote Act. Ensuring voters in all states can request a mail-in ballot without an excuse and have ample access to drop boxes. Requiring hand-marked paper ballots and reliable post-election audits, as well as authorizing election security grants for states to modernize voting systems. The Disclose Act, which makes it very clear where all this dark money is coming from in our politics, hugely popular with the public, as are, by the way, the voting provisions. The Honest Ads Act is in this bill. A ban on partisan gerrymandering. Earlier this month, we also introduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in the Senate, legislation that complements the Freedom to Vote Act and that would restore and strengthen key portions of the Voting Rights Act, including provisions to prohibit discriminatory practices that keep people from the ballot box. This week, we took an important step toward passing legislation to protect the fundamental freedoms. But Republicans are once again talking about blocking even debating the Freedom to Vote Act, as well as, by the way, they have not signed up on the John Lewis Act, and we should be doing both. Every single Democrat has united behind the need to ensure our elections are fair and that all Americans can vote in the way that works best for them. We're united, and we are committed to getting this done. I know that passing voting rights legislation isn't going to be easy, and the fight has just begun. There's too much on the line to stop now. It was over 10 months ago that a violent mob of insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. I will always remember walking to the House chamber at 3:30 a.m., shattered glass from broken windows strewn in the hallway, with Senators Blunt and Vice President Pence. And with us were two young women who carried the mahogany boxes holding the state's electoral votes that still had not been counted. We returned to do our jobs that night, and we made clear to everyone democracy will prevail. And then 2 weeks later, I stood on the inauguration platform with President Biden and Vice President Harris under that bright blue sky. And by the way, on TV, maybe you couldn't see it, but there was still spray paint at the bottom of the columns and in front of the makeshift windows we had in place. I said this is the day our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does, goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We cannot do that if Americans are actively being disenfranchised. The reason you were meeting today is the simple idea that Americans must be able to freely choose their elected officials. Whether people are trying to upend our democracy through an insurrection or trying to limit the right to vote, it's all about, for them, taking people's rights away. In the words of my friend Reverend Warnock, some people don't want some people to vote. We must keep up this fight. And in the end, with the help of you and millions of others from across the country, we must prevail. Our very democracy depends on it. Thank you, everyone.